Good evening and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia webinar series. This is our 28th webinar since the COVID 19 lockdown began earlier this year. We have had no choice but to move to the virtual platform to do our interviews, to bring special events and stories and other formats of discussion to you. Uh, this webcast is also in association with PIO TV, which is People of Indian Origin, and UNI, United News of India Television. We have a very special guest today. He is the author of Jugalbandi, and the slug says the BJP before Narendra Modi. So we are going to be talking to Dr. Vinay Sitapati, and welcome. I would like to particularly welcome our colleague Purnima Sharma, a senior journalist who's going to join our panel and to talk and have a discussion interaction with Vinay. And let me now ask FCC South Asia President, Mr. S. Venkat Narayan, to formally introduce the author and start this evening. Venkat, please unmute you. Yeah.
Thank you, Manish. A warm welcome to you, friends who are watching this webinar on all the social media associated with the FCC and PIO TV as well as UNI TV. We are having a discussion on a very interesting book which was published only 3 weeks ago, and the publishers tell me that it's already on the best sellers list. The book looks like this, and it is written by Dr. Vinay Sitapati. This is his second book. He has written his first bestseller on P.V. Narasimha Rao. It's called Half Lion. Vinay is head of the Department of Political Science at Ashoka University, close to Delhi in Sonipat in Haryana state. Um, he was educated in Bangalore National Law School, and he has a PhD from Princeton. And the Times of India has described him as a rock star historian. I have just finished reading his book. Vinay, I think it's very well written and very racy. And, it's once you start reading the book, you want to finish it because there are very few readable books written by academics about contemporary politics in our country. A lot of American scholars write books, and one of the best books written on Indian independence was by Larry Collins and Dominic Lapierre, Freedom at Midnight. And your style reminded me so much of what those guys wrote in that book, and I'm not surprised that it's doing so well. And this book is of great interest to people who follow political developments in India. And Vinay has come up with a very interesting theory that the BJP has come to power for all the work the RSS and other Hindu institutions have been doing for the past 100 years. And we now have somebody from the BJP who began, in Godhra, son of a tea seller, and a low caste gentleman heading a party which was started essentially by Nagpur Brahmins and upper caste thing, and it has completely undergone a massive change. And Vinay talks about it at great length, and I would strongly recommend people to read this book. And Vinay is going to speak about the book, how he came to write about it, and he has asked for 10 minutes to make that his statement. And after that, I have had the privilege of meeting Advani and Vajpayee, and I've read the book. I'll have a lot of questions to ask, but Munish, may I request you to invite Vinay to make his opening statement? Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Venkat. Thank you for introducing the author to us. And of course, um, let's hear from the rock star. Vinay, the floor is all yours.
Thanks. Mr. Gupta, I'm just sharing the screen. Can you see this new screen? Okay, can you see this new screen of mine?
what we can see a blue curtain behind you.
Oh, okay, okay. Wait. Just give me a second.
Anil, can you give Vinay the rights to do screen share with us?
Okay, no, that's okay. If I'll just spend another 2 seconds, and if that's not possible, I will. I'll just speak for
He
10
will set
minutes.
it up while you start talking. He will set it up. Don't worry.
Okay. Just to be clear, you're still seeing me, right? You're not seeing a
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
yeah. No. Now we will. Now we will. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Can you see a PowerPoint?
Yeah, sure. Sure, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So you can see a PowerPoint with the book photograph on it, right?
Right,
That's right.
right.
Okay, perfect. So I started working on this book 3 years ago. It's called Jugalbandi, the BJP before Modi. The previous book, which Mr. Venkat alluded to, was called Half Lion. It's a book on Narasimha Rao, which came out in multiple languages, including as an academic book in the United States. Now, I am 37 years of age, so I'm a child of liberalization. I remember standing in line when the first McDonald's came to India. So in some sense, I was trying to make sense of the political story behind liberalization. When I wrote my book on Narasimha Rao, I realized that liberalization just didn't happen. It wasn't just IMF pressure. And it wasn't just Manmohan Singh with the blueprints who opened the economy. It was a political story. It was navigating the politics of change. And that was the impetus for this book. The next book, Jugalbandi, dealt with something else I grew up with as a child of the 90s, which is the rise of the BJP. Now, those of among you who are Indian intuitively know what Jugalbandi means. It's used in the context of a musical concert, and it features two solo musicians. Now, what makes a Jugalbandi different are two aspects. One, a Jugalbandi is a musical concert where the two musicians typically play different instruments or come from different styles. So they don't normally go together, but somehow in the Jugalbandi, they happen to make music work. And second, it's not that one is the main performer, the other is the accompanist. They both are making equal music. And I use the 60-year relationship of Vajpayee and Advani. Vajpayee was Prime Minister of India in 96, 98, and again from 99 to 2004. Advani was in many ways the architect of the first bloom or the first rise of the BJP in the 1980s, and was deputy prime minister for much of the Vajpayee years in government. And I look at their 60-year partnership, the yin and the yang, to tell you the 100-year story behind Narendra Modi. I think a lot of foreign commentators, just assume that just like you have Duterte in Philippines, you have Bolsonaro in Brazil, you have Trump, or you had Trump in the United States, Modi is another right-wing populist who wakes up in the morning and discusses and decides what his politics are. The book argues that's not the case at all. He is the disciplined face of a 100-year movement. A lot of what he does is entirely predictable and a consequence of a 100-year journey. And the book tells you the 100-year journey before the rise of Narendra Modi. It has plenty of Modi and Shah growing up, but the book ends when they seize national power in the around after 2004, but really around 2014. Now, to tell you, and I'm sure we'll discuss this in the Q&A, why this particular relationship is so important. Consider the following. We live in India. India is a very hierarchical society. We are obsessed about status. So all of you who have gone to college or school in India know that we have this junior senior concept. Juniors must always behave respectfully towards seniors. This continues with whatever job you join, and we just don't like it when people who once reported to us, now we report to them, right? Now, no one anywhere in the world likes it. In Indians, as many of you journalists know, that IFS officers, IAS officers resign if they feel that they've been quote unquote superseded by somebody from a junior batch, right? So we are that sensitive to a hierarchy that was created at the beginning of a relationship, and it should persist for the next 30, 40 years. In that context, consider the following facts. Between 1968 and 1986, Vajpayee is the head of political Hinduism of the Jansangh and then the BJP, and Advani is his loyal subordinate. In 1986, the RSS orders Vajpayee to step down, and Advani becomes the head and the face of the BJP from 1986 all the way to 1995, which is the period in which the BJP is taking a radical turn. Once again, as the BJP comes within the grasp of power, and Advani realizes that you need a more moderate, more acceptable face to get coalition allies, he steps down and serves under Vajpayee, as Vajpayee becomes prime minister 3 times, right? To have a single switch in the context of India is delicate, right? To have a double switch, I don't think has any precedent in any political partnership anywhere in the world. And the core argument of the book is that this idea of teamwork, this idea of partnership is embedded in the DNA of the BJP. So in that sense, Vajpayee and Advani's Jugalbandi is only symptomatic of the larger ideology of the movement. They don't split. Now, many of you have covered India for decades. I'm sure you would have noticed this, which is that the Congress is constantly splitting, mainly on egos. Even the cadre-based Communist Party splits on ideology. The BJP rarely splits, right? Very, very rarely. It happens once in a decade, once in 5 years. And when it happens, it serves as a lesson for those within Hindu nationalism. What makes the BJP split-proof, relatively split-proof? It's a huge source of power in India, where party vote banks are constantly being split by leaders who are fighting with each other. I call it in my book Hindu Fevicol, and it's a key argument of my book. The book ends with the transition from the old Jugalbandi, Vajpayee and Advani, to the new one of Modi and Amit Shah. That story is still being written, but I offer some tentative comparisons. This is a photograph which is in the book of Advani, Modi and Amit Shah attending the funeral of Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 2018. But the primary focus of this book, it's not a ideological book in that my job is not to tell you BJP is good or bad, Narendra Modi is a heaven or horror. That's not my job. I'm an academic. My job is to tell you what Hindu nationalism is and why does the BJP win. I provide you a causal argument for the rise of the BJP in the 1980s. The core is that it was demand driven. And into that step the VHP, the RSS, then the Congress. The BJP only supports the Ayodhya movement and the rise of the BJP on Hindutva lines in 1989. Right. So I give you a lot of arguments for why the BJP wins, for what is Hindu nationalism. And I feel that we're in a particularly important juncture because one, as I pointed out, to understand Modi, you have to understand the 100 years that created him. He's not Donald Trump, right? He is a disciplined face of a long movement. And second, the BJP is going to be around for a very long time. My own prediction is that for the next 20 years or 15 years, the BJP will either be the party in power or the principal opposition around which the non-BJP parties get together to form government. In that sense, the historical parallel in India is between 1967 to 1989, when the Congress wasn't completely dominant, but it was still the biggest party. And to defeat the Congress, you had to have a coalition of anti-Congress parties. That gave the Congress complete, it was the axis on which Indian politics swung at that time. The BJP is likely to be the axis on which Indian politics swings for the coming decade or two. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a lively debate.
I'll ask you the question that Times of India asked you when they first interviewed you. And what interested you? What made you swing from, the book on Narasimha Rao all the way to the Jugalbandi of Vajpayee?
No, that's a great question because, as I pointed out, see, the one thing I realized as an academic is that all of us, I'm sure all of you write stories which are initially sparked by your interest, right? All of you journalists, you have a certain spark, you have certain interests, and that draws you to certain kind of stories. You have a priori interest in sports or fashion or politics, and then you write those kind of stories, right? But all of you as great journalists know that once you enter a story, once you start interviewing people, the story may sometimes go in a different direction. And that's a good thing. right? So as I pointed out, I'm a child of the 1990s, so I was interested in liberalization. I remember standing in line, as I said, when the first McDonald's opened in 1995 near my house. And Narasimha Rao was the instinct that drove me to understand the political story of liberalization. The other big story in the 1990s was the rise of the BJP. So soon after the Narasimha Rao book, I was thinking, why not write a biography of Vajpayee, right? In some sense, he was literally the next prime minister. And as I began studying Vajpayee, I realized that Vajpayee is only half the story. That to understand Vajpayee, you have to understand Advani, because right from the beginning, Hindu nationalism has required an orator and an organizer. So it has required Shama Prasad Mukherjee, English-speaking, youngest vice-chancellor of Calcutta University, to be its face in parliament, but it also requires a Hindi-speaking, dhoti-wearing Deen Dayal Upadhyay to deal with the cadre, right? So I realized that, Vajpayee and Advani were a Jugalbandi. You can't understand Vajpayee without understanding Advani. And I then, as I did more research, realized that their teamwork, their Jugalbandi is actually representative of the larger movement, right? Of course, there are other factors for why the BJP wins. There is Modi's charisma. You could say that now that they are so firmly entrenched in power, there is money power, etc., etc., etc. But really what I realized, and Mr. Gupta, when I was doing my research on Narasimha Rao, I met a lot of Congress politicians, and within 1 minute of meeting me, they would complain and backstab another Congress politician. That's the way the Congress functions, right? All of you who are journalists who have interviewed a congressman or woman know that within 5 minutes, you'll get all the dirty linen coming out with regard to your own party, right? Whereas when I was talking to the BJP and RSS leaders for this book, it's not that they loved each other, right? There are plenty of people in today's BJP who don't like Modi and Amit Shah. But they always had the sense that if they speak out against them, they are betraying family, right? And, there is that's why it's called Sangh Parivar, right? And the genius of the RSS has been to create family-like relations between non-family members. That is very important, because Congress is also a family party, right? It's just a party of one family. So the RSS has understood that family is very important for teamwork, but you can't have blood relations. Otherwise, you'll only support your own children, And that really pushed me to see that I have to tell the story of Vajpayee and Advani, but I have to nestle it in this larger rise of the BJP. And, the book begins in the 1920s, which I argue is also the beginning of Hindu nationalism. So their entire life was the life of Hindu nationalism before Narendra Modi.
One more interesting thing a couple of things rather from what you said. First of all, earlier on, you mentioned that you wrote the book on Narasimha Rao because you had your own reasons why liberalization came at the time that it did. It wasn't, politically thrust upon it. It wasn't Congress wanting it. It wasn't Manmohan Singh, some blue paper or white paper on it. And similarly, you talk about, Jugalbandi on the other side, the complete contrast, BJP. Tell me first, what do you think was the thrust? What was the factor that moved Narasimha Rao towards liberalization? Because that is an interesting twist in the Indian polity. Before we come to this, the BJP, first time rising to power, not the Jan Sangh and the Janata Party.
So I wrote a whole book on precisely this question. And Mr. Gupta, I didn't go in with an angle. Like, I wanted to understand liberalization. But if I had facts showing that Narasimha Rao did nothing, I would have written it, because I'm not related to Narasimha Rao. I'm not carrying his water, nothing, right? So definitely the spark that created that sort of put Narasimha Rao in the hot seat was the balance of payment crisis in May, June, July 1991. There's no question. But the book, Narasimha Rao book, Half Line, argues that, India has had crisis for a very long time. So, for example, in 1981 itself, we had a balance of payment crisis. We took an IMF loan, at that time, the largest loan in India's history, around 1980, 1981. That did not spur the then Prime Minister to open up the economy, right? So, while crisis is true, Indian politicians love to waste a crisis. Narasimha Rao did not waste a crisis. That was the first key point. And second, evidence to show that it's really the politics is, within a year of Narasimha Rao's prime ministership, the economy is back on track. We are actually in a position to be able to repay the IMF loan. Yet a lot of the reforms that came was after 1992, right? Whether it was you are giving licenses to new banks, allowing private sector in telecom, allowing private sector in airlines, all of them actually happened after the crisis ended, which showed me that Narasimha Rao, with the loyal aid of Amarnath Verma, his principal secretary, and Manmohan Singh, his finance minister, was opportunistically using a crisis rather than responding to a crisis. But that's just a summary of a 300-page book, you know.
No, but tell me something, the other point that you made, and I'll stop after that and let Venkat and Purnima take off from there. But do you think Jugalbandi is something that was, that's a natural process within BJP, RSS, or it was something again thrust upon Vajpayee and Advani? I mean, you know, they sort of went well together. They knew each other well. But it was Jugalbandi, the sort of, you know, it was RSS saw that, and Advani saw that, and Vajpayee saw that as the only way to move forward.
Yeah, no, I look, definitely they liked each other, right? They used to eat pani puri, they used to go for films, right? So there was personal chemistry. And as you point out, there was also professional compatibility, right? But I point out in this 60-year relationship, there were plenty of times where they didn't get along, right? Where they, you know, as for example, between 98 and 2004, when Vajpayee was prime minister, Vajpayee had no use for Minister Advani, which is why he propped up his principal secretary, Brajesh Mishra, and Advani was furious, right? Again, between 1986 and 1995, when the party is taking a more radical turn, Advani doesn't have any practical use for Vajpayee because Vajpayee is a moderate face. So think of it like a marriage. Sometimes the marriage works, but there are long periods in a marriage where things don't work. You know, what forces you to continue that marriage? And that to me is RSS ideology. And it's not just ideology, because other parties also have ideology. It's an ideology that focuses on unity, right? That, and it looks at Hindu history. The question is not whether the Hindu history is valid or not. To say that Hindus have been defeated in battle because they fight with each other, because of backstabbing. And so the lesson from that for the 20th century is an organization that may fight, but it never divorces, right? It's a marriage, it's an odd couple where but you never, and that is embedded in the DNA of the RSS. So when Vajpayee and Advani, when the marriage was not going well, what held them together was the ideology of unity. And there are many periods where that happens, many periods. And of course, there are many other periods when the relationship is going great, you know.
So that's the same parallel you draw of the Jugalbandi between Vajpayee and Advani and Amit Shah and Modi. And you feel that Jugalbandi is one of the strong points of the BJP. That's how they continue.
Yeah, and before that, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Deen Dayal Upadhyay.
And Deen Dayal Upadhyay. First of all, welcome.
Welcome.
Somebody's mic. Yeah. So Vijay, you might have to keep your mic switched off when
Switched off when we. But welcome.
Welcome Vijay Naik, a senior colleague of ours, and Venkat, I would turn to you for. I'm sure that you are waiting to ask so many questions, and then Purnima.
Purnima, who likes Vinay's writing, let me give her the honor of asking her questions first, then I'll take.
Okay.
Purnima.
Okay, thank you, Venkat. So, Vinay, I mean, your writing style is no doubt it's very good. Probably because maybe you've been research scholar, you were a journalist, you were a lawyer, then you went to Princeton to do your PhD. We would talk about your writing style, but first I would like to understand, since we have been talking about RSS. So, do you think your book gives a different perspective about RSS? How do they work? Who they are? Because once your book Jugalbandi, would he have a different perspective about RSS?
Yeah. No, so that's a good question, Purnima. First up, I show you very clearly that, you know, the RSS is not the puppet master that is running the BJP. That's a wrong way to look at it. You know, it's not that every morning, you know, Narendra Modi wakes up and runs to his phone and calls up Nagpur and says, you know, what should I do today? That's not true at all. So that relationship is a complicated one. It has ups and downs. So the first big lesson from this book is that think about the BJP as a semi-autonomous political project, right? Of course, it relies on the RSS, but there have been several times where the RSS and the BJP have fought. For example, in the 1984 elections, the RSS campaigned for Rajiv Gandhi, right, against Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And between 98 and 2004, when the Vajpayee government was in power, K.S. Sudarshan, who was the head of the RSS, was very critical of Vajpayee, especially on Vajpayee's economic policies. So that's the first thing about the RSS. The second thing is, as I pointed out earlier, unity, right? If you go to a shakha and you see, the group exercises of the RSS, half of it is to focus on physical exercise and martial exercise, but half of it is like what you call corporate team building, people working together, standing on top of each other. What they're trying to do is that they want Hindu society to work together, right? And again, it's not my job to say, are they inclusive, are they exclusive? Because you don't have non-Hindus who are really members of the RSS. I try to count, I haven't found a single Muslim pracharak, so there's no debate about that. But on the other hand, when it comes to Hindus, you have plenty of Hindus from castes other than the upper caste, other than Savarna caste, who are joining the RSS, many of whom have become pracharaks. And that will be reflected in the next 20 years in the RSS top leadership. So the second thing to learn about the RSS is organizational unity. The third thing is, it's not just an upper caste organization. A lot of critics of the BJP want to think of it as an upper caste organization so that it only represents 20% of the vote share. That's not true anymore. That's its original DNA, but that has evolved. And the biggest evidence for that is that in the 2019 elections, more Dalits, more tribals, and more OBCs voted for Narendra Modi than they voted for anyone else, right? And that represents a change when it comes to the thinking of the RSS. The fourth thing is, and this is a deeper point, Purnima, which is that one of the reasons why the RSS doesn't clash that much with the BJP, right, is that on 90% of issues we consider governance, the RSS doesn't have an ideological view. So if you say, what is the RSS view on China? The RSS doesn't have a view on China. What is the RSS view on demonetization? The RSS doesn't have a view on demonetization. So whether it's economics, foreign policy, the RSS really doesn't have a view. Where it does have a view, demographics, Article 370, Citizenship Amendment Act, the way history is taught. These are a few areas where the RSS has a view. But again, on 90% of what we consider governance, the RSS doesn't have a view. So don't look there if you want to understand how Prime Minister Vajpayee behaved or Prime Minister Narendra Modi is behaving. So know what part of Modi's actions is ideological and what part is dictated by his own personality.
I just have a very interesting question from one of our foreign correspondent members, and he's just WhatsApped it to me. It's from Tim Bitcher, and he's the bureau chief of AFP in South Asia, and he's also the vice president of our club. And he says, to put the BJP into an international context, after two major election wins, is the BJP more or less divisive than similarly dominant parties in other countries? That's one.
So the divisive is a complicated word.
One second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it rebels in calling opponents gangs. Because BJP rebels in calling opponents gangs. Tukde or Khan Market gang. Why does it appear such a severe organization? So that's the context of the question. Go ahead.
Well, so look, it's a good question. And I argue in the book that to really understand Hindu nationalism, you have to begin in the 1920s. Look, I'm sorry, I'm an academic. So anything you tell me, I'll say, let's go back 80 years. I'm sorry for that, right? But what am I? That's my value add, right? You know the present, I know the past. You have to go back to the 1920s when the British introduced elections to India. Now, elections or the idea of one person, one vote is completely alien to Indian society. Indians live their social and economic lives as groups. So the moment you introduce elections, it's not that suddenly Indians become Swiss voters voting on the basis of interest. What happens is panic. Groups begin to redefine themselves as minority or majority. So the Muslim League is created immediately as in anticipation of elections, because they realize that Muslims will be confined to a permanent minority, the word, right? And Hindu nationalists like Lala Lajpat Rai, Madan Mohan Malviya welcome elections because they feel that, look, elections suits us very well because Hindus are a social majority, right? So in that sense, the BJP has always been democratic. It has not been liberal. It's not been focused on individual freedom, right? But it's not fascist. It's democratic. And I hear you when you say that the BJP is divisive, but most other parties are structured this way, and that's because most other parties are based on not individual freedom, on not interest. That's not how they see voters. They see voters on the basis of groups. All parties in India, unfortunately, play vote bank politics. The BJP has just been able to create the biggest vote bank of them all. And I would just take you back to Indira Gandhi, a prime minister I think Narendra Modi is most like. She reveled in calling her opponents anti-national, right? Or as CIA agents. So that the big phrase in the 1970s in labeling opponents was a CIA agent. Embedded into group identity politics is the demonizing of the other. Unfortunately, most Indian parties are structured this way at the local level or the national level. And the tragedy of India is that we have not really have a really liberal constituency, right, that can try to create inclusive politics based on individual freedom. It just doesn't exist. So in that sense, and again, I'm not carrying any water for the BJP. I'm sharply critical of the link between BJP and violence in the book. I'm sharply critical of Godhra and the Gujarat riots and the role of the institutions of Hindu nationalism in it. But one of the reasons that the divisive tag doesn't seem to catch on to the BJP as much as it should is the BJP turns around and said, look at all other political parties. How are we different from any of them except that we play the game better than they do?
As much as
I think
as much
Mr.
as
Nayak
you
wanted to
say
ask
only,
something, but he's muted.
yeah.
You're on mute, sir.
Yeah.
Chitapati, I do agree with you about the RSS because I remember the days actually when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister and Advani was the Deputy Prime Minister. And you talked about Sudarshan also. I remember that Mr. Sudarshan as well as Dattopant Thengdi, both of these leaders went to Vajpayee and Advani and chided them that they were not taking initiative so far as the building of the Ram temple was concerned. And there was a clash, but then they were admonished by the RSS at that time. But later on, I think the situation is slowly changed because I think Mr. Modi, because of his popularity, his diction, and his way of dealing with the communication with the people as well as everybody, he has, I think, he has risen bigger than the RSS now, actually. Because RSS, now it looks that RSS is at the background, Mr. Modi is the front of it. And what do you think? Because what is going to be the future of the RSS, whether it is going to dominate the BJP or whether Modi is going to dominate the RSS?
Well, sir, firstly, you're absolutely right when it comes to Dattopant Thengdi and Sudarshan. One is, of course, they felt that Vajpayee was not carrying out the ideological agenda of the RSS. But second is, both Sudarshan and Thengdi, as you know, were left-wing when it came to economics. Dattopant Thengdi was also the head of the largest trade union in India, the BMS. So that was his additional criticism of, let's say, Vajpayee's disinvestment, right? Now, coming to your second point, which is that has Modi grown bigger than the RSS? I don't think so, because they operate on parallel fields, right? And compared to Vajpayee, Modi agrees much more with the RSS. He has a Citizenship Amendment Act, Article 370, whatever, coming close, triple talaq, etc., etc., etc. But as I said, 90% of, I spend time with pracharaks, right? And pracharaks, 4,000 to 5,000 of them, are the full-time frontline functionaries of the RSS. 90% of their time, they don't, meet the district collector, they don't meet politicians. The sphere in which the RSS operates is the social sphere. That forms the background, or that forms the basement of the house of the BJP, which is the political house. But there isn't a clash. And look, the point of my argument or the point of the book is not that everyone in the RSS and everyone in the BJP don't have an ego. I mean, everybody drinks the same water in India. So Narendra Modi is a cult of personality, but look, compared to what the Congress is today, the BJP continues to have a little more internal democracy. Narendra Modi pays respects to the head of the RSS. I think for the Ayodhya groundbreaking ceremony, the head of the RSS was also present. I'm not sure, but I think so. And many people in the RSS continue to come into the BJP, continue to leave the BJP. So I don't see that. And it's not just the RSS, even within the BJP. Of course, Modi is more popular than the party, but given that, there are plenty of people in the BJP today who Modi doesn't like. For example, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, or Vasundhara Rajesh Scindia, the former Chief Minister of Rajasthan, were once competitors to Modi, right? But there's something about the BJP ideology where even when you have these disagreements, right? Gadkari versus Modi, etc., 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 it seems like a large Indian family where there is squabbling, but there's never any split. If you compare, just look at how the Congress, I think in the last month, has treated the 23 signatories who very mildly, very, very mildly have questioned, the present state of the Congress party. And it tells you that even in a situation where Modi is more popular than the BJP or the RSS, even today, the Hindu nationalism exemplifies more teamwork than the Congress does.
Venkat, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Vinay, you have said in one of your interviews that India is already a Hindu Rashtra. 80% of the people in this country are Hindus. Mrs. Gandhi thrived on the Hindu vote while appeasing the Muslims. Same thing with Rajiv. It is just that the BJP snatched the Hindu vote from the Congress to the BJP. And Modi and Amit Shah, the new Ram Balram or Jai Viru combination. But in a country where 20% of the population belongs to several other religions, and Islam being a major one with more than 12% of the population, a Hindu Rashtra, is that something to be worried about? Because historically, Hindus have been a tolerant community. They're not extremists. Extremists are just a minor, a fraction maybe. And, you have more people practicing more religions in this country than possibly any other place on the planet. And considering the point you're making that the BJP will continue to dominate Indian politics for the next 15, 20 years or another generation or two or whatever, is that a good thing or a bad thing for India?
Well, my book spends a lot of time not saying is it a good thing or a bad thing, because I leave that to you, right? But the facts are very clear that Hindu nationalism, and I spend a lot of time arguing this in the book, is a break from traditional Hinduism in two ways, right? One is, as I pointed out earlier in this conversation, it's far more tolerant of lower caste Hindus than traditional Hinduism, right? The fact that today you have a Dalit president, right, and a OBC prime minister, and it's not a coincidence that it's happening under a BJP government. So compared to traditional Hinduism, Hindu nationalism is far more tolerant and far more reaching out to lower castes. Initially, it was for electoral reasons, but if you wear a mask for 100 years, that mask becomes your face. On the other hand, traditional Hinduism, as you pointed out, was very tolerant when it came to other sects, other religions. There is an apocryphal story. It's an apocryphal story. I haven't been able to find that when the first Muslim Arab traders land in Kerala, the local Hindus build a mosque for them, right? So that is the traditional, you can say, dichotomy of Hinduism, where it was hierarchical on caste, but quite tolerant when it came to religion. Hindu nationalism, on the other hand, when it comes to religion, has been far more intolerant, right? And this is not Narendra Modi. This is in the DNA of the RSS and the BJP and the Jansangh from the beginning itself. I give you an example in the book where Hegdewar notices, Hegdewar is the founder of the RSS, Dr. Hegdewar. He notices that there's a Sufi shrine near Nagpur where Hindus are also worshipping, and he doesn't like it. Right? Because he doesn't want any mixing between, he wants the religious lines and the religious boundary to be very clear. At the same time, he wants the caste boundaries to become very fluid. And one of the reasons why the BJP is so hard to beat is it's both progressive when it comes to caste and regressive when it comes to religion. And I keep telling my friends who hate the BJP, at least understand your enemy. If the BJP was only an upper caste party, where it was against Muslims as well as Dalits, it would get just 20% of the vote, right? That's not what the BJP is today. But I'm afraid that the regressiveness that you talk about goes hand in hand with its progressiveness when it comes to caste.
Another question, Vinay. Amit Shah has said that the difference between Vajpayee Advani as a team, Modi and Amit Shah as a team, the difference is that Vajpayee Advani were not sure that the BJP could come to power only on the basis of a Hindu vote, whereas the Modi-Amit Shah combination is absolutely confident that they can come to power only on Hindu vote. Now, does that make the minority vote irrelevant? There are hardly any Muslim MPs except Shanawaz and another, couple of guys and all that. Does this make the BJP so comfortable about banking on only Hindu votes that the minorities will completely be sidelined? What will happen to the future of other religious minorities in India if the BJP is convinced that they don't need to bother about pleasing the minorities and they can thrive on the majority vote and rule this country for years to come, given the state of the Congress party and other regional parties in this country? What are your views on this, Vinay?
Well, two reactions, Mr. Venkat. First is that, I don't disagree with you, but what is a Hindu and what is the majority religion is highly fluid, right? So sometimes Hindus vote on the basis of religion, sometimes they vote on the basis of caste, sometimes they vote on the basis of region. So that fluidity and flexibility will remain, right? And keep in mind that no Indian prime minister has got more than 50% of the vote share. I think Rajiv Gandhi got 49% of the vote share in 1984 on the back of his mother's assassination. Modi has got 39% and another 10% that goes to allies. So there's enough Indians who don't like the BJP, and if you have a better opposition, you could get that. And there are enough Hindus who can vote on basis of other group identities. You just need a better organized opposition to be able to ensure that. But one advantage the BJP has in its favor is it doesn't need to unite 80% of Indians, which are the Hindus. It just needs to get 30 to 35% of the vote share. All of you are experts on Indian politics. You know that because India has a multiplayer party game and it has first past the post, in most states in India, if you get 35 or even 30 to 35% of the vote share, you've won, right? So the BJP only needs to unite 30 to 35% of Hindus and hope that the remaining are fragmented enough. But that both means that the future is looking good for the BJP, but it's a very fluid dynamic. It could change. And really the core argument of my book is that it's not that the BJP wins because it's a majority, because yes, Hindus are a majority in India, but peasants and workers are also a majority. By that logic, the communists should have come to power, right? Bahujans or non-upper castes are also a majority in India, about 80% of the population. By that token, Kashi Ram and the Bahujan Samaj Party should have come to power. What distinguishes the BJP is organization and especially organizational unity. But the intrinsic nature of Indian society is not particularly favorable to the BJP. I actually push back against that argument.
I have a question from one of our audience, Anup Saxena. He is also a member of our managing committee. He's with German television. I think you mentioned this point before, but he wants to know that do you think that RSS is to Modi or BJP what 10 Janpath is to Congress?
No, not at all. I don't think so at all. I push back. Certainly in the period I'm writing about, there are yin and yang. So, for example, in certain things like the Ayodhya movement in the 1980s, the RSS gets its way over the BJP. When it comes to the sacking of Narendra Modi in 2002, after the Gujarat riots, Vajpayee wants him sacked, but the RSS and Advani stand behind Modi and they prevail. So that story is a very complicated story. So I would, one thing I would urge after you, I hope you all read my book. And after that, the idea of reducing a complex movement in Indian society to a very simple address, in Nagpur, I think sometimes makes for lazy journalism. I've seen that because simple stories are simple to understand, right? That's why Aesop's fables does well. The rise of the BJP is a complex contingent story. It's a large story, right? That's why it's here to stay. And we should take that complexity seriously. That doesn't mean don't talk about the RSS, don't think about the RSS. The RSS matters hugely, but that relationship is a complex one. It's not at all like 10 Janpat and Manmohan Singh during the UPA government. I wouldn't say that. And an even bigger reason for that is, as I said earlier a couple of times, on many issues that Narendra Modi government is interested in, the RSS doesn't have a view, right? It just to going to them to say, what should India do on China? What should India do on economics? What should the Modi government's response be to the farmers' stir? The RSS, frankly, doesn't have an opinion on that.
Let me ask you. Often you started. You made a very strong point for. I am an academic. I deal with history. I go back 80
Yes.
years. But early
Yes.
on in your 10 minutes of
Yeah.
talk about your book, you
Yes.
went on to say that I can predict that the BJP will
Yes.
stay in power for another 10 years, 20 years.
Yes.
Modi
Yes.
may not.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you do talk about the future. I mean,
Yes.
and you're confident about BJP's future.
Yes.
Where does this
But
confidence come from? Is
yeah,
it
but
from
just
the
to be
current
clear,
Jugalbandi? Yeah.
no, just to be clear, I'm not saying the BJP will be in power for the next 20 years. I simply don't know that, right? And as I said, the intrinsic fluidity in Indian politics is even the most popular prime minister, more people didn't vote for him than voted for him, right? That's just the nature of India, right? No prime minister has been able to breach the 50% vote share ceiling, right? But what I do say and what I do predict based on a study of history, right, which is that the BJP is likely to be the principal pole on which politics oscillates, which means that even if it's a non-BJP government in power, it will be known as a non-BJP government, right? Just like the Janta government between 1977 and 1980 didn't have any agenda of its own except a shared hatred of Indira Gandhi. There was nothing else that united them, right? That makes Modi the agenda setter, just like Indira Gandhi, even when she lost, was the agenda setter. And the underlying point is, therefore, study their past well. That's the point, right? So I'm not able to predict in the next election is the BJP going to win. I'm not able to predict that, right? But I'm certainly able to predict that the question of do you like Modi or do you not like Modi is going to be the big question in the coming elections, right? And that's the question that, and for that reason, whether you like the BJP, you don't like the BJP, you should know its 100-year past and read the book, right? That's the context in which I say it.
So the politics in the future of India is BJP or not the BJP? That's what you're saying.
In the near future, exactly. BJP or anti-BJP.
Yeah. So there's another interesting question. I mean, you seem to have fascinated our fraternity here. I have a question from Bipindra, and he says, did Vajpayee influence Advani policy or the vice versa during their years as the Ram Lakhan of BJP? And who towed the RSS line?
I think both of them were play acting. They were a Jugalbandi. They realized that you needed to have somebody who was the hardliner, somebody who was the moderate, right? So, there is, of course, the classical answer that the RSS was favored Advani and the RSS was always suspicious of Vajpayee. There might be some truth to it, but Vajpayee knew that. And Vajpayee knew that at points in which the party needed somebody more radical, he would give them his favorite radical, namely Advani, who the RSS liked, but who was also loyal to Vajpayee, right? So that was basically the game. Unfortunately for the relationship, when they came to making policy, when Vajpayee was in power between 98 and 2004, Vajpayee didn't really listen to Advani, right? Because Vajpayee felt that the division of labor had always been that Vajpayee handles parliament and Advani handles the party. And he felt that government was an extension of parliament, namely it was his job. And, he didn't need a minister, Advani, right? The only exception, and I point to that in the book, was when it came to better relations with Pakistan and Kashmir. Now, as I point out in the book, no prime minister in India has done as much for peace with Pakistan than Atal Bihari Vajpayee, right? And surprisingly, Lal Krishna Advani, who was a rich Macaulay Putra from Karachi, who was reduced to penury because of the two-nation theory and the partition of India, gives 100% support to Vajpayee in reaching out to Pakistan, right? That they fail is a separate question. But on this, there was a policy Jugalbandi, but otherwise in their time in power, Vajpayee didn't really take Advani's policy views quite seriously, but he continued to respect him when it came to the party.
I think Vijay has a question.
Yeah, Vijay, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vijay. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did it.
Yeah.
Okay. Vinay, I just wanted to join Venkat Narayan when he said about the minorities. I remember that during Vajpayee's time, Dr. Murlimar Joshi was the Minister for Human Resources. We sit with him, and at one time he told us that he would like to revolutionize the education of madrasas. And one day he took us to the BJP's office, 11 Ashoka Road. There, you see, there he showed us about 20 to 25 Muslims doing their namaz. So he was telling us and giving an impression that Muslims are slowly turning to the BJPs. Now, since the days of Vajpayee, what we found, as Venkat said, was that there was symbolic, kind of presentation of the Muslims or the minorities in the government of BJP. We had Mr. Sikandar Bakht as a foreign minister for 14 days. Then we had Dr. Abdul Kalam as a president. And there are very few people who are holding the top posts in BJP now. So it's a symbolic kind of a representation of the minorities now. But since Mr. Modi came to the power, it seems that the minorities are getting alienated from the BJP. And deliberately, I think perhaps they are doing it, because in UP, no ticket was given, and other sides also, no tickets are given to the minorities now. Now, as he said, Venkat said, it's going to be Hindu majority party actually. What do you think? Well, what happened to the Congress party, which was actually garnering votes of the Muslims for all these years actually, and now Muslims have gone away from the Congress party. Muslims have gone away from the BJP also because of Ram Mandir temple. So, what is the future of a minority in our country?
Well, thank you, Mr. Nayak. So on the second question, I'd be hard pressed to answer because I don't know, right? I'm focusing on, I can tell you Hindu anxiety, Khalistan movement, reservations, how the impact of that happened with the Hindus, right? But when it comes to the question of the political story of Muslims in India, I don't have as good a sense, so I'll avoid that. But on the first part of the question you asked, which is that there was a symbolic attempt during the Vajpayee government, and not just Vajpayee government, even in the founding of the BJP in 1980, as you pointed out, Sikandar Bakht or MC Chagla, who was a junior Gujarati Muslim and legal junior to Jinnah, was the chief guest in the founding convention of the BJP, right? These were all symbolic. Now, definitely Vajpayee believed in it, right? So I don't want to take that away from him. But equally, the BJP in that era was a 170, 180 to max 190 seat party. It knew the reality that if it had to form a stable government, it had to get coalition allies. And those coalition allies would not be comfortable with a 100% Hindu-only party. That circumstance has changed. Modi has been able to come to power on his own, and he's been able to come to power solely with the basis of Hindu votes. His outreach to OBCs, Dalits, and tribals means he doesn't have to reach out to Muslims. So in that, to at least now, again, not taking away from Vajpayee's personality, some of what you described, which is that Vajpayee and Advani had to play a little bit on the back foot, and Modi and Amit Shah can play on the front foot, has something to do with the mandate that the two Jugalbandis have received.
No, it's very interesting, Vinay, that you talk about that 35% statistic, today, that if you want to come to power, you need 35%. And Modi, is consolidating the Hindu fringes. And you answered that question on the minorities by saying that this Jugalbandi is not focusing on on the minorities by religion as such, but what do you think? I mean, your last chapter you said is on this. I haven't read your book, but I really want you to talk about it. What is the future of the current Jugalbandi, and how would you contrast it with the Jugalbandi on which you have written the book?
Well, I don't know what the future holds, but certainly I can say that in these 6 years, the Jugalbandi has distinguished itself from the old Jugalbandi in the following way. One is, of course, the Vajpayee Advani Jugalbandi was based on difference. They were really different people, different temperaments. When it comes to Modi and Amit Shah, I suspect that on 90% of issues, they have the same instinct, right? They don't have different instincts on Citizenship Amendment Act, on Article 370, on how to deal with the opposition. So that's a very big difference between the two of them. The second difference is that, in some sense, Modi is a better mass politician. I argue in the book that Advani understood the cadre, right? And Vajpayee understood parliament, but none of them could really win a state. Like they needed Vijay Raje Scindia for Madhya Pradesh. They needed Bhairav Singh Shekhawat for Rajasthan. Modi, on the other hand, has an almost mystical connect with the voter that is very similar to Indira Gandhi. So in that sense, the current Jugalbandi is a much better vote gathering machine. In that sense, they're definitely better politicians.
So you got a compliment from NC Bipindra, my friend. He says you are so good that he bought and read both your books.
Oh, thank you. I hope others do the same.
Purnima has something. Purnima, please.
I'm talking about the same thing because I have read your book, Half Lion. It was so interesting that a person who might not be interested in reading political books would be interested in completing that book because it is interspersed with so many anecdotes and facts, and the writing style is so lucid. And it flows like you are just flow. You get you tend to read the book completely, or you want to complete the chapter. So I want to ask you that what influenced your writing? Is it your journalistic experience, a long stint in journalism, or your career in academia? Because you were a research scholar, you went to study in Princeton, and then did that it influenced your writing style?
Well, certainly my law and academia has not influenced it because lawyers and academics tend to be bad writers,
Okay.
They tend to use a lot of jargon. They want to confuse you. And, they because very often they're not writing for the lay reader, right? And also if writing a legal brief was very, very clear, anybody could do it. Why would you pay money to a lawyer, right? So these kind of professions over time create artificial language barriers to give themselves some value. Journalism, on the other hand, is not like that, right? It's read by ordinary readers. It's read by non-experts, intelligent non-experts. So all of you as journalists spend a lot of time treating your reader with respect, right? The way you structure your lead. I don't have to tell you your own profession. You know it better than me. In my years in Indian Express, I only spent a couple of years. I really learned that, right? And I remember one of my bosses telling me that journalism is like, you have to give bitter medicine to the reader. So you should put a little bit of honey, and that honey is the writing. And I'm not an instinctively good writer, right? But what I am is a defensive writer. I like short sentences. I don't want to use jargon, right? I like to let the story speak for itself. And the two writers who've really influenced me are V.S. Naipaul and George Orwell. George Orwell has a lovely essay. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, Politics and the English Language. Don't use jargon, use active voice, not passive voice. If you come across a sentence and you can remove a word, or if you're not sure whether a word is required, remove it. So I spend a lot of time doing that. And I have a friend of mine told me that, look, the end of every chapter must have a hook so that the reader goes on to the next chapter. Otherwise, the reader will just close the book. And I followed that. But then I also say, okay, then let the end of the paragraph have a little bit of a hook that forces the reader to go to the next paragraph, and so on and so on. So as I said, I'm not a good writer. I'm a defensive writer. But what I like to do is marshal enough interesting facts to give you just one fact in the book. One of the big funders of the BJP and the Jansangh in the era I'm writing about was the grandson of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, Nasli Wadia. Now, that's such a fantastic story that I don't have to improve it with writing. I just have to be able to tell that to the reader in a clear way and stay out of it, right? So it's the relationship of the fact with the reader. But definitely, I obsess a lot about the reader, and that the reader must be treated with respect. And I realize very quickly that the reader also appreciates it. That if you try and if you don't lie to the reader, you're honest to the reader, you take in a little bit of effort to explain some background to a reader. Like, to give you an example, I know that there will be some of my readers who aren't Indian. So I have a paragraph or two on what the Westminster parliamentary style of government is in India, MPs and MLAs, right? Now, most Indians will sort of assume it, but I just put that one paragraph as a courtesy to somebody who may not be familiar with the context, but who is smart enough that once I give you the context, you can understand the intricacies of, the rise of the Bahujan Samaj Party versus the Samajwadi Party, which is really getting into the weeds of politics. So, I think, my sort of advice, if I can give to anyone else who wants to write a book, is if you treat the reader with respect, the reader treats you back with respect. In that sense, that's also a Jugalbandi.
One short question, that you interviewed 200 people for this book. How time consuming it was, and what were the challenges? How long did it take for you to write this book?
So it took me about 3 years, and the interviews are painful because I'm sure all of you as journalists know that the only person who has a bigger ego than the source is the secretary of the source. So you have to put your ego in the pocket. Also, once I finished the interviews, I would send back the quotations to the people either by email or in person. At that time, they develop cold feet, right? And there are many people who I would love to have told you that I met, right, for this book, and I can't, because even though I met close to 200 people, only about, I think, less than 100 people I have named in the book. The others, because this is such a sensitive book, unlike the Narasimha Rao book, with I met, for example, current cabinet ministers. I can't put their names, right, because they're currently in government, and they are very sensitive to allegations that you prefer that Jugalbandi to this Jugalbandi, etc., etc. But again, like I said, if you want to, if you have to build a relationship with the reader, you also have to build a relationship with the source. And again, all of you are journalists here, so I don't need to tell you that. All of you are better at this than I am. It's just that many of you have deadlines for 2 days, 1 week. I had a 3-year deadline. So then it was just a question of being disciplined, right? So it's not functioning. When it comes to interviews, it's not that I have some magic wand that all of you don't have. I have learned this during my 2 years as a novice journalist,
Venkat, you have something to ask.
But just one last thing. The one thing, Purnima, I realized when it comes to interviews is that if you go prepared, then people open up a little more, Like if I go and I start asking really basic questions, then the interviewee gets really irritated. Whereas if I spent about an hour just reading up a little bit, preparing, Googling that person, if that person had written a book or an article, just checking it out, they open up a little more. It took me some time to see this. But again, this is like coal to Newcastle. I'm sure all of you know this better than I do, right?
Venkat.
Yeah, Purnima, Matthew Arnold, the English writer, had said that journalism is literature in a hurry. So, this is the point Vinay is making.
Yeah.
Vinay, after reading your book, I get the impression that Advani was the guy who was working hard, and Vajpayee is the guy who's having lots of fun. He's enjoying his whiskey, he's eating chicken, and he's drinking with his buddies like Brajesh Mishra and Major Jaswant Singh. And as I think you quoted one of these people as saying, we are the ones, we collect the crowd, we are the ones, we organize everything. And this gentleman comes and makes a very great bhashan, and he gets all the credit. Yeah. So, the Mekale Putra, I feel very bad for him, but he realizes that his speaking abilities are no match to Advani's oratorial skills. And as one of them said, you quoted him, he is a bad poet, but a great speaker. Yeah. Now, do you feel sorry for Mr. Advani? He never got a chance to become the prime minister. He was projected as a prime ministerial candidate in the 2009 election, but lost, and he was very disappointed when in Goa Modi was made the leader of the parliamentary campaign and all that, and when he threatened to resign, and when he was, being nominated as the prime minister, he was very, very unhappy. But when you started writing the book, I think Vajpayee was in a coma. He could not. But Mr. Advani is still around. You never tried to interview him, or he would not speak. Nasli Wadia, you tried hard, and you still sulk about it that that guy never met you. And all
Yes,
that.
yes. No,
Was it a
I did. No, I did meet. I have met Advani, but it's off the record, and and I want to respect that, And but I did meet Advani. Vajpayee, I couldn't meet for the reason you mentioned, but I met many others close to Vajpayee, some of whom I can't name. The larger point, yes. I mean, I do feel. Definitely in my book, Advani is a tragic figure, right? But he's a tragic figure not just because he doesn't become prime minister, because frankly, he could have become prime minister. And he put the interests of his party over his self-interest, right? And that's a great thing. I mean, and he is in that sense, the essence of the RSS thinking, which is an emphasis on teamwork. So in that sense, but he is a tragic figure for another reason. He's plagued by self-doubt. He's a Hamlet-like figure, to be or not to be, and that I found makes him quite authentic. But to answer your first question, that Advani worked very hard. I realized that to succeed in politics, hard work is just one of many ingredients. Vajpayee had excellent judgment, right? He understood the tide of history very well. He knew when to kind of become the moderate, when to take the back seat. He actually worked very hard on building relations with opposition members, right? He didn't work very hard when it came to his own party, but he worked very hard with opposition members. That was very useful to the BJP in the mid 1990s when it was trying to attract coalition allies to form a stable government, right? So certainly, and also the most important skill Vajpayee had that Advani didn't was he could say without saying. Right? Vajpayee had this Obama-like quality that if you are a right winger and listen to him, you'll say, he supports me. If you're a left winger and listens to him, you'll say he supports me. Advani, what you saw is what you got. And that ability of Vajpayee to be a bridge, to mean different things to different people, means that he was justly Prime Minister of India. He was a better politician than Advani. But I do agree with you that Advani comes across as a bit of a tragic Shakespearean figure in this book, and somebody who needs to be recognized a little more, and this sort of simplistic view of Advani as a bigot, the truth is just much more complicated.
And also, I thought, Vajpayee also comes across as a very insecure chap who is afraid of competition from Balraj Madhok, M.L. Sondi, Subramanian Swamy. And the day Vajpayee lost his, majority with one vote, Subramanian Swamy looks at Vajpayee and that's a smile of revenge, because Jayalalitha wanted him to be the finance minister, and of course Mr. Vajpayee wanted Subramanian Swamy to disappear into thin air and all that kind of thing.
But even Advani does that. Like, Advani's great rival is Murli Manohar Joshi, who he, with the help of Vajpayee, manages to sideline very well. So look, the point I'm making here is that I think Vajpayee was a great prime minister, don't get me wrong, but he was also a politician. You don't get to that level by being like bathed in milk, right? But the more sort of the point I'm also making in who are the people who threaten Advani and who are the people who threaten Vajpayee. Vajpayee is never threatened by hardliners within the party because he needs them for his Jugalbandi. He's always threatened by the articulate speakers in parliament, right? Advani is always threatened by the Murli Manohar Joshi kind of beloved of the RSS, because that's his role, right? He is not threatened by the powerful speakers in parliament, because that doesn't conflict with Advani's role. So in that sense, I have got some criticism in the book that I'm unduly harsh on Vajpayee, but I did feel that there is this huge aura of Vajpayee. And I can see why, which is that he was the most charismatic politician India has produced. Many of you who are on this video call have met Vajpayee. And I can tell you, all of you would have been charmed by him. I think one of my greatest research assets while writing this book was I never met Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So I could just look at the evidence without having stars in my eyes, right? But that said, I'm also critical of Advani. I'm critical of his political opportunism in the Rath Yatra. It was cynicism. There was nothing more than that. But yes, I certainly puncture a little bit this grand liberal image of Vajpayee and tell you that the truth was a little more complicated.
But Venkat, do you have any? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Are you planning a book on the Jugalbandi 2.0, namely Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, Vinay?
I think I'll have to wait for a couple of decades before they before they leave power, and it's for this very simple reason. Why was I able to get this kind of access when it came to the BJP before Modi? Because most politicians only care about the next election. So if I ask them what happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they're willing to tell me the truth. They are willing to give me diaries, right? Whereas if it comes to Modi and Amit Shah right now, everyone will be too afraid to speak, right? Nobody will give me the diary. To give you one example, the lawyer of Vajpayee and Advani gave me their private correspondences, right? Lawyers, important people to know. The lawyer of Amit Shah and Modi is not going to give me anything, I can assure you that. So because I'm an academic, I would prefer, about a 20-year distance between, the events I'm writing about and me, because it gives me some sort of clarity. Another reason, I think you need 20 years to actually figure out what the story is, at least for what I do. The story of Amit Shah and Modi is still evolving. Is it a permanent change, which is what I suspect, or is this going to be a blip? There's a small chance it might be. So I'd rather give this some time.
No, I was going to ask you that question. That do you see? I mean, do you really draw a parallel? You can't, as of yet, between an Advani, Vajpayee, Jugalbandi and a Amit Shah, Modi, Jugalbandi.
Well, there's a difference there's a similar way in which they've divided allocation of responsibilities. In that, Amit Shah is now focusing on elections, focusing on the cadre, right? Whereas foreign policy, economics, is Modi's domain a little more, right? To give you an example, during the Citizenship Amendment Act, if my memory serves, and I think all of you can check me on that, Modi made a point not to appear in parliament, right? Because he wanted to suddenly be seen as the moderate face to Amit Shah. And as I pointed out, this is the dynamic of Hindu nationalism. It needs a hardliner, it needs a moderate. It needs an orator, it needs an organizer. And Vajpayee and Advani were smart enough to realize these roles. And I think even though Amit Shah and Modi are quite similar to each other, unlike Vajpayee, Advani, unlike Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, perforce the nature of the movement has split responsibility between them.
Yeah, you answered my second question with this last comment, which you did. Lastly, whether this came out of your meeting with Advani or not, but one reason I feel that Advani has not let his daughter and son come into politics is what you mentioned before, that the party and RSS want to completely stay away from any dynastic perpetuation. Do you feel that? Is that going to be a strong
certainly point? I can't speak for his particular interest, but certainly the BJP I write about were much more sensitive of not being seen as a dynastic party, right? And so then that is definitely embedded. And to give you just one more example of that, the RSS has a rule that the pracharak should not be married, right? And it's to prevent nepotism, because if pracharaks are married, then their children will enter the RSS, and the RSS will today look like the Congress party. I've always felt that the Congress is not a particularly nepotistic party. It's an Indian party. In every sphere in Indian life, we have dynasty and nepotism. The fact that the BJP has it just a little less, the communists have it a little less, is a radical break from India, not a continuation of it.
Great. Well, this has been very interesting, very lively, very fun. And you certainly speak as well as you write, Vinay. So
thank you very much. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And it's also nice because all of you have seen as living witness parts of what I'm writing about secondhand, right? I'm not a living witness to what I'm writing about. So that's why it's a nice Jugalbandi, as it was. So thank you very much.
No, and I wish you 20 good years ahead, because certainly then you'd be able to write about the Modi Shah Jugalbandi. And what a great career and lovely. I think a lot of people are complimenting your writing. So thank you for joining us. There is somebody, Ajay Pandey has said, the fundamental difference between Atal Advani and Modi Shah is Advani didn't report to Atalji.
Right. Well, so the point I show in the book is that between, let's say, 1957 is when they meet properly. They met once in 1951, but Vajpayee and Advani meet properly in 1957, and Advani is secretary to Vajpayee. So there's a straight up hierarchy. And that hierarchy persists from 1957 all the way till 1986. The only period in which Advani did not report to Vajpayee was 86 to 95. Then once again, when he becomes deputy prime minister, etc., he's functionally reporting to Vajpayee, right? So they were not at any given instance they were not equals, but the totality of the relationship is an equal one.
Thank you very much. Unless anybody has any more questions, we are definitely. We've had fun, and it's been a pleasure having you with us, Vinay. And we wish you many good books ahead. I would like to request now Venkat to please sign off with a vote of thanks. Unmute yourself, Venkat.
Yeah. Vijay wants to ask a question before I do my thing. Vijay, go ahead.
Vijay. That is sustained BJP is a India Raja India, you have all these people you see, they have been a dynasty and they were either in the Congress party or the BJP, more BJP than the Congress party. So there is dynasty, but very on a very minor scale. We see Mr. Pramod Mahajan, his daughter today is a member of Parliament. So dynasty is there, but not dynasty like Congress party.
Could you comprehend that?
There was
I couldn't. I think he was saying that there's also dynasty in BJP, just like there's dynasty in Congress, right? That's what I think he said. So let me just answer that, and then I can continue that offline. Which is that, of course, as I said, the Indian reality is one of nepotism and dynasty, and there is enough political science evidence to show that there are dynasties in the BJP, right? But let's just look at the top three people in the BJP, the top three, which is Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, JP Nadda. Right? None of them have come to politics because of their parents, right, or because of their family, and none of them as yet have family in politics, right? The top three. Look at the top three in the Congress party. They all share one surname because there's Sonia Gandhi, there's Rahul Gandhi, there's Priyanka Gandhi. All three of them came to power because of family, right? All three of them have family who might join politics, and that's I'm looking at the very top, and that tells you something. And as I point out, it's not because the Congress is an Italian party or all these criticisms. The Congress is a very Indian party. This is a very Indian thing to do because you see this in the Samajwadi Party. You see this in the DMK, right? You see this in a host of other political, you see this in the Shiv Sena, you see this in the NCP. So to that extent, I would say that to the extent that the BJP doesn't have it, it's because it's a conscious and radical break from what it sees are the problems of team building in India, which is for nepotism being one of it. Because if your party is nepotistic, the incentives for anyone else to join is pretty low, right?
And that has certainly helped the party in the current modern context, right?
Yeah.
With the young voters. Venkat, you want to close? Unmute yourself.
Well, this was a very fascinating discussion on your very interesting book, Vinay. We look forward to seeing you write more books. You are almost our neighbor. You are at Ashoka and we are near the Supreme Court. And when you are in Delhi, do come and drop by for a drink and interact with my colleagues. And
I would love that. In fact, I would have preferred a in-person thing, but this is the next best. So thank you very much. But I would have absolutely loved that.
You're in Bombay today. Are you coming to Delhi tomorrow?
No, I'm sorry. I won't be able to make it. I'm sorry for that.
Not to worry. Wonderful. Thanks. Within 3 weeks after your book came out, we managed to get you and you participated in this very lively discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you, Vinay, Munish, Vijay, and Purnima. and all the people who are listening and watching this all over the world. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
You also get a special hello from ISAS in Singapore and the Indian, what it's called, the India Chamber of Commerce in Singapore from
Oh,
Paul
fantastic.
Johnson saying hello to you. Thank you very much. Good night, and we'll close this broadcast now.